Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of How to Sell Your Vision. My name is Moti Elkaim, and I'm the host of this podcast series. As always, our goal is to bring to you successful founders, CEOs who have raised funds and can share their insight on the fundraising process, as well as VCs who can share their view from the other side of the table. I'm super excited to have Rob Ward with us today, who has been the CEO of multiple emerging companies, have done multiple fundraising rounds, and now he's here to share from his vast experience. Rob, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Moti. I'm really looking forward to this call.
Absolutely. So, Rob, you've led multiple emerging companies to growth. You've scaled their businesses. You've done successful fundraising. Let me ask you this question. If you are now seeing a young entrepreneur, a young founder, he or she are about to enter a meeting with an investor, and you have the ability to give them one tip, one key insight, what would that key insight be?
It's such a tough question because you go in lots of directions, but I think the key bit that people want is clarity. So a simple, clear message. Often the skill, and it's a cliche, but it's always worth remembering, is missed. That is, the simplification is the hardest thing to do. So the line that says, "I didn't have time to write a short message," or whatever the version of it is so critical here. So being clear and straight to the point. I also think smiling and being somebody they can back, because the crucial part here, investment's about people, and all business plans, which investors know, never become real until after the war has been won, and invariably they die in the process of going through the war. So it's not about necessarily the inevitability of problems, it's how you're going to respond to problems. So it's a people investment, and so crucially it's your integrity as a person, therefore, and but also the clarity of your message is the absolute basis of any form of successful investment raises.
That's really powerful and amazing to hear you say it. I interviewed a partner in a VC who said, I've seen so many founders who are trying to put everything in, and when you try to put everything in, you leave everything out, which is kind of a hard thing to digest at first, but because the message is so, I would say, overloaded, it's almost diluted in a sense. You're overloading and diluting in the same action.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, and also the appetite around investment today is much more about a business that's going to make money. And so, how are you going to make money? There's been some nonsense, and I said this at the time, and I'll say it again now, and I'll say it again later. Around investment is about perhaps purely visibility or numbers on viewing, for instance, or other metrics that sound good. But actually, profitability, cash management, the real things that long-term matter. Because if you want to be attractive to be bought one day, if that's the goal, it might not be, but if it is, then that legacy is going to be based on a purchase will be based on its ability to have that profitability. And that's so don't be distracted by the one or two businesses that get away with not being profitable and highly valued. There's a whole range of reasons behind that, but when it comes down to the reality of most businesses, cash management, profitability is actually having that conversation early is key as well, after you become credible as a person.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we've seen it in today's market in 2023, especially in tech, where the bubble exploded, and money management, cash management, the economics of the business really mattered to investors more than before, because they realized, investing in hype results in the hype being exploding in their faces. So you really have to show that you can manage a business. I'm fully on board with that, and I'm glad that you're bringing it up, because some founders still think that it's all about perception and vision and dreams, but most often than not, it's about the business. You have to, at the end of the day, manage and operate in, not, I wouldn't say even profitable, but a business that is generating revenue, some kind of revenue.
Mm. Yeah, and I guess how do you generate revenue? Because clearly, quite often investment is pre-revenue or it's early stage revenue. So I think that if you want a third step around fundraising is that raving fan and how that fan is a customer, firstly, and how that customer becomes profitable to you. Then how do you grow that customer? So I love conversations around concentric growth within a customer, and then how that customer becomes a long-term advocate or consumer of that business is really a very key thing to get across. So there's so many basics here, but the understanding your high value customers, how do they become high value? So the acquisition, but then the long-term value that sits around that. Now, these things we talked about forever by multiple people. Lean startup thinking started 15 years ago, but the conversation now is about how do you maintain the customer. You can't get away with the basics in business of the most expensive thing you'll ever do is get a customer. And the most profitable thing you'll do is then resell to an existing customer. So the more you have to find new customers, the more that's a problem. And the more you can sell to an existing customer, the more that's a benefit. And no matter what you do, all those, that'll be the same for everybody. And so those common threads are crucial to then talk about. I love the principle of applying. You ever used Fibonacci's numbers in a sort of as a visual model for growing a customer?
Right.
You ever used it? Yeah. It's the concentric circle, but within it there's a model. There's a golden ratio, and everybody wants to just Google that, and you'll see it as a visual tool, but also a numerical tool. And of course, the basics there is how does 1 + 1 = 2, 1 + 2 = 3. So that's the growth element of a customer for word of mouth, and how does by getting one customer does that become another customer, and how do they grow, and how do they grow others? And this is basically word of mouth. Again, the basics of fundamentals in business. Are people talking about you to then become new customers? And those that really show that self-perpetuating, potentially customer acquisition versus, incidentally, the high churn and highly expensive route where you have to keep throwing money at a business to get new customers.
Right.
And that's so I want to hear, if I was an investor, so I think about that in what is in their heads is, once we get to that point of critical mass of customers, how do they then generate their own life form and keep propelling as a continuous customer? People then avoid that distraction around buying customers. Think so. The freemium model has its merits, but be careful with that, because it can it's very that crunch point between free versus profitable is where we really discover the real business life form.
And I think that's the trap, and I'm really happy that you brought it up, because I think that's the trap that the smart investor will probably know to identify very quickly. You can onboard 500 customers through a freemium model because you got a hook, right? You got them for a second. But how many of them actually stick? How many of them do refer you to new customers? Because as you said, acquiring a new customer is the most expensive thing, but the profitability from existing customers, if you invest in those customers, and the margin on existing customers, even through referrals, is actually cheaper and will contribute to the longevity of the business. And I'm wondering, because you brought up a point that I haven't heard much in this podcast, and I'm glad you're bringing it up, because founders are going in for the hockey stick. Let me offer the freemium model. Let me just show that I went from 0 to 200 customers in 6 months. That's great for a slide, but what's happening after that slide? And that's a very powerful point that you're bringing in.
So when I used the example earlier of the Fibonacci numbers, actually, if you put those numbers into a spreadsheet and create a graph from it or chart, actually, it doesn't look like a hockey stick at all. It looks like I guess the closest you'll get is to a aeroplane on a runway, and that aeroplane is on the runway a long time, a long time. And even when the wheels come off the ground, it is actually still on the runway for quite a long time. But then it will take off at some point. Now, what we're talking about here is the early phase of along the runway, and it's a great coincidence that runway is also your cash runway. Is those are the early customers that really start to show that they're going to be the influencers. So the influencers are the ones that we are then going to. Those are the ones that are actually very horizontal for a long time. Then you'll start to see the majority kicking in to ultimately the full life form of the business. And then actually it's not a hockey stick. It's actually almost a vertical takeoff. So it doesn't look like a lot of people have is this exponential curve. It is a much flatter, much longer, which does require patience. But how you get there, and that's what you persuade your investor to believe in. And you need to establish, of course, that customer is there already. And that their money that you're asking them to give you is going to be used well to then make sure
the
that
takeoff moment.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really it's that thinking that it's not going to be this ridiculous straight off takeaway, because it's extremely rare. In fact, I challenge you to come up with any business model that genuinely does that. They don't. They are a long time getting going. But when you think of the Fibonacci numbers, that actually, even when one or two are just connecting to the one or two, and then it slowly grows, then you get this huge takeoff. And that absolutely can happen, and it certainly happened to us. But you will learn.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So I think actually interestingly, you mentioned the long-term position. When you're looking at a business acquisition, think of it not as just and I've done coaching in this as well as run our own businesses, but don't think of it as think of more as a marriage. And in that marriage, of course, it's not the wedding day is perhaps at the apex of it, or maybe not, but the bit after it is when it really matters. And so what happens once the acquisition's happened is actually what happens next. And the best businesses will have incredible follow-up, backup services that may seem almost excessive, but the best businesses that can show all kinds of touching points that keep that customer on board, that surprise that customer, to keep the customer engaged, keep them loving and staying with you. Those are the moments when you realize that that's a marriage of a customer. And married customers, which is where the analogy fails, unless you've got doing a monogamous relationship, is where you have multiple relationships with other people who want the same long-term feeling. And of course, long-term is attractive to buy. And it's good fun to work in as well.
That is very powerful. I think it solves the problem. It's really powerful. I have to say it again. because it solves the problem for a lot of early stage companies who have customers, right? Their growth is not the exponential growth that they're accustomed to think that they need to have in order to attract investors. They're growing, right? They have one customer, the second customer, the third customer, and they're growing. But the stickiness of those customers is often, and the resources they invest in making those customers stick and happy is often left aside. And they feel that they're doing something wrong because they don't have a hockey stick growth. But in essence, they do have something that is very powerful to show here. And for some reason, everyone is putting it aside. They just think they have to show unbelievable growth in customers.
But this is also a change in business model here, and this is really exciting. I wanted to talk about this because we've had this noise, and it's been nonsense around a lot of valuations based on high level of front loading to escalate, hire hard, massive burn, acquire quickly, huge revenues quickly to get high valuations to justify that, and then everyone gets out quickly. It does work at time, and it has worked, but for every one that's worked, there's tens of thousands that don't, and that's because people tend to run out of money because they don't make it, they don't survive that moment. I love Apollo 13 as a film. I don't know whether it's a very old film now. To many, must be probably made before some people listening to this are born. But it's an important story of how the moon capsule got round the other side of the moon, and the dark side, but they had nothing to keep them alive. But then they discovered there were things that they could keep themselves alive. So the resourcefulness to stay alive, the pure startup thinking that needs to stay in a business, not just after you've got funding, but that culture that stays lean, stays very resourceful. Hence the film Apollo 13. If you haven't watched it, watch it, please. Something to relax on maybe this evening. But how they survive is extraordinary. And they get round the dark side of the moon. Now, what we as a business need to show is that resourcefulness that will focus on the core things that matter. And that needs to stay true. And that's why I think the business model is fundamentally moving back to where this hasn't changed. It's just things were distracted for a while in the bubble. So that resourcefulness that says we will get by using the absolute minimal level we need to get maximum impact. And we work as a team that is energized to think like that, and that's consistent. And we're very clear about that survival part. Then we can get through and get to the other side. And we need to, and as a team, we need to demonstrate to the investors what that other side looks like. It's that the moon is a metaphor here. But what does that other side mean to you as a business? And so what point will the investor know that they're clear about where they are at that point? And why then was that very a good use of their money?
It makes a lot of sense. We have a couple more minutes left, and I want to take us back in the conversation, if that's okay with you. We spoke about simplicity, keeping your message clear, and that's a hard thing to do. And as it was your kind of the go-to insight that came to mind, I'd love to ask you, what is your process in keeping it simple? How do you know what to keep out, and how do you know what to plug in your pitch?
Boy, you've got some tough questions today. How do you know? Well, you will be surprised how I think that the reality here is that people don't really care about you. They don't really care. And so the first thing is to make sure that you get your head around that people's attention span as a result of that is very, very limited. So if they can't remember three things about you, you fail. So there is obviously these, slogans that are three things. But if they can't remember the three things that you are, then you've not got it right. So you have to distill it down into three things at the most, and I often think that communication can as a visual can look like a pyramid. So what's the very one thing at the top of the pyramid, the very point of your business, the point of the pyramid is thing that you are. And if you can't say that, then you're history. And if they can't remember that, you're also history. So what is the one thing? And then underneath it, there are, say, three things that you change as a result. So I'm not going to role play that because that would be too obvious. But they need to go, oh, they are that, and they do this. And that's the key around simplification. And you can test that, and you can test it, and you need to be eloquent enough to express that in a way that is really clear to somebody that doesn't know you. So some test that on somebody that doesn't know you. Prior, do what you do require prior knowledge? And the more prior knowledge you need, the more you've got a problem. The less prior knowledge, the better. So can you express it in a way that doesn't require prior knowledge? Because what's going to happen is that that investor inevitably is going to have partners or an investment committee to talk about and sell back to you. So if they can't articulate that because they haven't got the basics, then they're not going to. But if they do it badly, they're going to look stupid. So somehow you've got to get that person to understand it in that way that they transition to whoever's ultimately holding the pound notes. It could be that it's an angel investor. They can make a decision themselves. But the same thing, they're the hardest because they really, really want it straight. If you're selling to somebody that's an investor for an investment group or part of an investment fund, then don't forget they've got to then go back and sell it. So they need to be as good as you to say what you are doing and why you're worth investing. So So that's the thing: is make sure that is what needs to be clear. Is that it can be expressed very clearly and quickly.
I think that is one of the most powerful statements I've ever heard regarding investor pitching. Express it in a way that doesn't require prior knowledge. And a lot of times I see brilliant founders, really smart founders that are saying, the investor didn't get my technology. It's not about the technology. It's about the story. And if you're able to articulate it in a common sense way that doesn't require prior knowledge, then you're going to be able to bridge the gap of knowledge, because they don't need to have that knowledge. They just need to understand it. And we have to ask ourselves, what is the one thing we want them to understand? That is brilliant. Perfect.
Well, there's actually, I saw a line once, if you, the reading age of a 12-year-old, might be even a 10-year-old, something like that. If you can test it on a 12-year-old, call it to 10 to 12-year-old, and they come back with what you're doing and they get it, you've got a fighting chance of being able to work with that no prior knowledge factor. Because people's reading age, believe it or not, is somewhat maxes out at about 12 years old. So this is terrifying, but at the same time, it's not about general. What I mean is that if you can get it done if a 12-year-old gets it, then you're in a good place. So find a 12-year-old, do it legally.
I like to call it as the wife test. The wife, the husband, or the partner. Just take someone who's out of this world, practice it on them. If they get it, then anyone can get it.
I wouldn't tell your partner anything. I would. It'll scare the life out of them. But they're going to have different baggage. I'm going to challenge you on that one.
They're going to have different baggage. That's very true. That's very true.
Talk to somebody. The Australians have a great expression: is what's in their wheelbarrow. Everyone's pushing a wheelbarrow. So find somebody with nothing in their wheelbarrow. And that's a 12-year-old who doesn't care about it. So
that's very true.
I think we get that point. But yeah.
We did.
But either way,
we did.
It's all exciting and believe in it. Yeah. But it is that. And then come up with your own great questions. Why would they want to invest in you? You know, turn the interview around. That's the best trick. You know when you're on a winner if you can turn the interview around to an interviewing them. And investors really like being pushed, that in a very polite way, by the way, not in a rude way. But as soon as an investor thinks that they've been interviewed for the ability for them to invest in your business,
they love the gutsiness of it.
They will love that. Yeah. Absolutely. Top tip.
Yeah. It's funny. I just saw an episode of Shark Tank where Richard Branson was a guest shark, and he wanted to invest in this 10-year-old kid. The 10-year-old kid had an idea for a square skateboard that you can fit in a locker room. And Richard Branson said, okay, I'll give you $65,000 for 20% in the company. And the kid looks at Richard Branson and says, okay, I can get the money from any of the other sharks, but what can you do to help me scale the business? And Richard Branson just loved it. He was obsessed about the kid afterward.
There we go.
Yeah. Cool. Rob, thank you so much for... Oh, sorry, go ahead. You wanted to say something?
No, great story. That's a great story. This is what it's all about, isn't it? We've got to be it's a lot of work these days, but don't let. I have one final thing, because the markets are always going to be up and down. The markets are always going to be up and down, and some will say it's a down at the moment. It isn't. That's perception. The good stuff always rises to the top, and investors, there's plenty of money out there for the right investment. So stay positive. You're going to get lots of knocks, but that's because good stuff is worth investing in, and there's a lot of noise out there. But don't worry. Just stay true to who you are, because there is all investors know in down rounds or a post-bubble environment, this is the very best time to invest. So I can tell you there's plenty of money out there that wants to find a good home. And in fact, the wise money is there, and the best businesses always come out of this environment, and they know that.
Good stuff always finds its way to the top. I love it. I really love it. That's a powerful message. We're coming into the top of the session. I said it at the beginning of the recording here with Rob. I know you founders are going to get a lot of insight from this conversation. I got a lot of insight from this conversation. I know the listeners are going to capitalize on a lot of the tips that you gave here today. I cannot be thankful enough for this conversation. This was absolutely brilliant. Rob, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us.
Well, I love your work. Keep it up. And keep enjoying it, everyone, because that comes through, and that's what people want. Take care. Thank you very much.
Thank you.